Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Bank of Queensland Annual General Meeting. My name is Roger Davis, and I have the honour of being the Chairman of the Bank. I welcome you, therefore, all of you, to the 142nd Annual General Meeting of the Bank of Queensland Limited, which I am now pleased to formally open in accordance with the Bank's constitution. I will act as Chairman of the meeting. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of those shareholders and others who are listening to these proceedings via our webcast, particularly those interstate and overseas. I make a special welcome to several past directors and chairmen of the bank, especially Mr Neil Summerson. I'd also like to welcome Ms Evie Bruce, a partner in King & Wood Mallisons Lawyers, and Mr Martin McGrath, the lead audit partner of KPMG, our auditors. Could I now ask that you turn off all your mobile phones? I declare that a quorum, as required by the company's constitution, is present. I would now like to introduce you to the other directors with whom I serve. To allow shareholders to better know their elected representatives, I've asked each director to speak for no more than about 30 seconds on their background and areas of competency for the board. I will ask Mr David Willis, Ms Karen Penrose and Mr John Lorimer and Mr Warwick Negus to speak on their backgrounds to you when we are to consider Resolution 2, which relates to their election and re-election as director. On my immediate left is Mr David Willis. Do you want to say a few words, David?
Thank you, Roger, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am up for re-election this year, so with your indulgence, I will speak to you at the time that agenda item arises.
On his left, Karen Penrose.
Roger, and good morning, everybody. I'm Karen Penrose, and I am also up for election, so I have the opportunity to speak to you a little further into the meeting.
On her left is Mr John Lorimer.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted and privileged to be standing for election for your bank, and I'll give you a fuller background on myself when we reach that agenda item.
On John's left is Michelle Tredenick, a long-standing director. Michelle.
Thanks, Roger, and I'm not up for re-election, so I do get to speak now. So it's always a pleasure to be back in Brisbane, where I grew up. My background is in financial services and technology, and I sit on a number of other boards as a company director, amongst them, and Roger told me I had to mention this, Cricket Australia, where I'm glad to see that we're actually back on a win again. But I'm delighted to be able to continue to serve as a director in your company.
Thank you, Michelle. And on Michelle's left, Mr Bruce Carter.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Bruce Carter. I'm an Adelaide-based director. I had a career in chartered accounting. I worked and was a partner at Ernst & Young, and then had 20 years with Ferrier Hodgson, a financial restructuring firm. I finished there 4 or 5 years ago. I've been on the Bank of Queensland board for 3 years. I'm also chairman of the Australian Submarine Corporation, and I'm on the board of Sky City Entertainment and Aventus, which is a large property group. I chair the risk committee for the bank. My skills lie in finance, in commerce, and I've spent a lifetime working with bankers and credit and corporations. It's a privilege to serve as a director of this bank. I enjoy it very much, and I hope that today is as enjoyable for you as it will be for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. On my right, the CEO, Mr John Sutton, who needs no introduction, and you'll hear from him later. On John's right, Mr Warwick Negus.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm up for election today as well, ladies and gentlemen, so I'll speak more to my background when the resolution comes up.
Thank you, Warwick. On Warwick's right, Margie Seal.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Roger. I've been on your board since 2014, and I sit on the IT and remuneration committees. I'm a professional company director with public company directorships in the telco, technology, health, property, and obviously in the banking sectors. I have 25 years senior executive experience in the global publishing, health and consumer goods sectors. My career was firmly based initially in sales and marketing in FMCG, so working with the retail sector and consumers was bread and butter to me, and then I became CEO of various companies in Australia, New Zealand and in Asia. I really have experience in driving organisational change and transformation in response to new digital data and content models, and that's something which is obviously very important in a range of sectors, but particularly in the banking sector. I enjoy very much working with BOQ and the management team there, and look forward to keeping on doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. And on Margie's right, none other than our dear friend Richard Hare.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, all. I joined the board of the bank in April 2012 after 23 years in corporate agribusiness. Today I'm on the board of a small private agribusiness out West Queensland, BEC Stockfeed Solutions. I'm on the board of Reef Casino Trust, and I'm the chairman of the government-owned Cotton Research and Development Corporation. I'm on the audit committee, I'm on the risk committee, and I'm also on the IT committee. And like my fellow directors, it's a delight to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And on Richard's right, the company's General Counsel and Company Secretary, Michelle Thompson. Michelle, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have a board that represents our geographic diversity and that has considerable experience in business and banking and other core competencies relevant to our corporate strategy. With such diverse industry experience, we're delighted to have you serve on our board, gentlemen and ladies. Registration, I point out that for your convenience, the company utilises an electronic registration process for general meetings. As an organisation, we encourage our shareholders to deal with us electronically. Around 46,000 of you now receive our annual report by email, which is arguably the most efficient way for shareholders to receive timely communications from the bank. This is beneficial for the environment and represents, of course, a substantial cost saving for BOQ and you, our shareholders. Any shareholders who would like to register receive communications from us electronically can do so after the meeting at our share registry desk, and I encourage you all to do so if you have not already done it. The notice of meeting dated the 27th of October 2016 has been dispatched to all shareholders, and I propose to take it as read. I have an apology from Messrs John Reynolds and Tony Love, former non-executive directors of the Bank of Queensland. Are there any other apologies that need to be noted? Okay, there are no more apologies. In terms of voting, each shareholder or proxy holder who registered today would have received a blue voting card, and in the interests of efficiency and convenience and in accordance with Clause 41 of the Constitution, I will call for a poll to be held on each resolution on today's agenda, and this blue card will be used during the holding of the polls. I intend to deal with the discussion on all items of business on the agenda, then conduct the polls on all the resolutions at one time at the end of the meeting. So you do get a chance to vote, but the voting is going to be done electronically and at the end of the meeting. So make sure you mark your blue forms accordingly. I will then close the meeting. The votes that you have recorded will be counted and the results will be announced to the ASX and be placed on the BOQ website. You will also see the details of the votes to hand, and that may give you some indication as to how the voting will proceed. Proxy votes. Link Market Services Limited, the company's share registry, has provided its final proxy reports. I will not report the proxy results now. Instead, I will report them as we come to each item of formal business on the agenda. They will then be displayed on the screens behind me, so the information is before you when the relevant resolution is discussed. And for the record, as stated in the notice of meeting, if I have been appointed proxy as chairman with no direction as to how to vote and I am eligible to vote as the proxy, I will vote in favour of all resolutions. Now, in the interests of an orderly meeting, I would like to mention some matters of protocol before we commence. Shareholders and proxy holders will be given a reasonable opportunity during the meeting to ask questions and make comments on the bank's financial statements and on the business operations and management of the bank. As mentioned in my welcome, Mr Martin McGrath, seated in the front here from KPMG, who are the bank's auditors, is present to answer any question about the conduct of the audit and the audit report. There are 2 microphones stations in the room for the purposes of questions, and a bank representative will be in attendance at each microphone station to help you. If you wish to ask a question, make your way to the microphone, make yourself known to the representative, showing them your blue or yellow card that entitles you to speak at the meeting, and when I call on you to speak, the bank representative will introduce you to the audience. I make mention that this meeting is being broadcast via the web, so please keep your questions brief and to the point so that viewers can hear the question clearly. And so that we can be fair to all shareholders, I also ask that only one question is asked by each speaker. If you have time at the end, you may ask a second question. If there are customer account, registry or other operational issues, there will be BOQ and share registry representatives available in the foyer after this meeting to assist you with these queries. In the interest of fairness, we don't want to hold up the meeting on routine operational issues that can be dealt with more effectively outside of the meeting room. And please avoid any remuneration issues until that particular agenda item is reached. And finally, John Sutton and I will endeavour to answer your questions as best we can, but we may call on management with particular expertise in certain areas if necessary. Now, I know there's a lot of protocol here, but unfortunately that's the way we have to run meetings today, so I apologise for the length of the directions and instructions, and I will now provide you with my Chairman's address. BOQ's focused strategy on niche segments has delivered an increased profit for the fourth consecutive year. This has been achieved against a background of record low interest rates, continued market volatility, and intense competition for both loans and deposits. Cash earnings after tax increased 1% to $360 million, and earnings per share was down only slightly from 97.3 cents in 2015 to 95.6 cents in 2016. The bank's Common Equity Tier 1 capital ratio remains strong at 9%, and reflecting our confidence in the strength of the bank, your board has chosen to maintain the half-yearly dividend at 38 cents, taking full-year dividends to 76 cents per share, fully franked, an increase of 2 cents on the previous year. Whilst our return on equity decreased 40 basis points to 10.3% in 2016, our credit quality continues to remain robust across all our portfolios. This is the direct result of the disciplined approach we have taken to risk management since 2012. The business is now on a much more sustainable footing and better placed to stand the ups and downs of the Australian economy. 2016 has not been without its challenges, of course, and the list of industry-specific headwinds we face is indeed lengthy. Interest rates at all-time lows, increased public scrutiny, slowing credit growth, continued market volatility, greater regulatory uncertainty, increased attention to stable funding and capital ratios. Meanwhile, cost pressures are increasing as all banks fight to better manage rapid changes in technology and changing customer preferences. Competition for loans and deposits, as I mentioned earlier, is also intensifying, adversely affecting the all-important net interest margins. The combination of all these factors has made it a very difficult year for banks, with one analyst noting that revenue growth across the sector in the second half of 2016 was at the lowest level in 25 years. As a result of these headwinds and the relative impact on BOQ, our share price has been under pressure through the year, with total shareholder return, which is capital appreciation and dividends, negative for the past 12 months. This should, however, be considered in the context of our performance over the last 3 or 4 years, a period in which Bank of Queensland has outperformed the sector and the broader market on a TSR basis. And I want to assure shareholders that despite these challenging environment in which we operate, all banks are facing exactly the same conditions, but BOQ remains in good shape. Our future is influenced by the general economy we operate in, and whilst a rising tide lifts all boats, you can't swim for long against an ebbing tide. It's therefore important to note that Australia's transition from a resources-led growth phase to one predicated on services, exports and construction will take time, especially in the wake of broader global volatility. Despite these challenges, we are still enjoying a period of solid economic momentum domestically, supported by low interest rates and relatively low unemployment and exchange rates, which we believe are helping the Australian economy perform at an acceptable level. Economic growth, however, remains mixed across the states, including Queensland and the other commodity-based states. As a national bank, we benefit from our geographic diversification, but remain cautious about increasing household debt, housing affordability and serviceability, growing underemployment and a declining participation in the labour market and the potential impact of rate rises and housing market weakness. Against this background, it's not surprising that future growth prospects for the banking sector and your bank remain subdued. the headwinds we've discussed all impact the sector's ability to maintain earnings growth and generate traditionally higher returns on equity. But even in this environment, Bank of Queensland's maintained its strong financial position, good profitability and sound risk management. It's a testimony to management's ability to continue to execute our robust strategy, albeit with an even greater emphasis this year on strategic cost management, productivity gains and managing for performance in trying market conditions. Our commitments to create Australia's most loved bank by focusing on niche banking segments that value a more intimate customer relationship and supporting them with an ethical framework that emphasises our 4 strategic pillars: customer in charge, growing the right way, there's always a better way, and loved like no other remains unchanged, and we believe will continue to deliver superior returns for shareholders over the long term. 2016, we've certainly continued to deliver against our strategic pillars. One of the most pleasing aspects of this year's result is the continuing strong contribution from our specialist niche businesses, Bank of Queensland Specialist and BOQ Finance, who continue to exceed our expectations and deliver strong returns. Our Virgin Money business has just launched a new highly attractive mortgage product using Velocity Points that is delivering strong growth and providing unique access to an exciting new customer base that could not be sourced through our traditional banking footprint. The goal for management is to integrate all our distribution platforms, OMBs, corporate branches, Virgin Money, into a seamless distribution network, improving efficiency and client-focused standards that we pride ourselves on at Bank of Queensland. I'm pleased to say that work on this initiative is already well advanced, ably assisted by a re-engineered digital technology strategy. I'd like to take this opportunity to comment briefly on 4 industry issues that are attracting increased shareholder and public interest. These are conduct and culture, remuneration policies, bank capital levels and risk in the housing market. A number of events over the past few years has increased scrutiny of the industry's conduct and culture. At BOQ, we understand that banks have a social licence to operate, and we take this very seriously and are committed to operating with the highest ethical standards. Our executive team and many of our staff have voluntarily adopted the Banking and Finance Oath, and we've established our own ethics committee in 2015 and have conducted extensive ethics and integrity training across the bank. Add to this our support of the ABA's, the Australian Bankers Association's 6-point plan that emphasises a strengthened code of banking practice, customer advocates being appointed in each bank, improved whistleblower standards, removal of those exhibiting poor conduct, a review of product sales commissions and an extension of ASIC's powers, and we believe we will be able to continue to lead BOQ in a manner that is firmly underpinned by the right trust and ethical standards. Remuneration is another subject that remains high on the banking industry's agenda, especially with respect to pay equality, performance metrics and absolute levels of compensation. In terms of remuneration at BOQ, we continue to strive for a high-performance culture predicated on profitable growth, where executive awards are regularly benchmarked by independent consultants and are based on performance, not an entitlement culture, with the board retaining full discretion of all outcomes. Our remuneration policy and philosophy includes a deferral element, is incentive-based along the lines of 1/3 base and 2/3 incentives, and the incentives are highly correlated to the returns to shareholders and reflect performance against a mix of financial and non-financial measures. Remuneration includes a risk gateway and customer and staff satisfaction scores, whilst long-term performance grants are based on face value and not fair value. Your board, however, remains increasingly aware of community expectation with regards to executive remuneration. And in this regard, it may be worth noting that your executive team's compensation in terms of short-term incentives are down this year, confirming that at BOQ the path of executive compensation is not always up, despite an unbroken increase in profits over the last 4 years. The question of capital adequacy is also topical, given the increased regulatory standards being imposed by global regulators and the desire of the local regulator to ensure that bank capital levels are unquestionably strong when internationally benchmarked. Whilst we acknowledge that the direction of regulated capital levels remains unclear, in the short to medium term, we still see BOQ as a relative beneficiary of the new capital regulations. However, we strongly believe that regional banks continue to be disadvantaged in our bread and butter business of writing residential mortgages and would welcome a further narrowing in risk weights between the majors and ourselves to level the playing field. All we ask is a fair go. A subject that may be more of interest to you, of course, is risk in the housing market. This is an important issue for shareholders and should be noted as also the current topic du jour and one I've already alluded to, namely asset quality, especially as regards residential real estate. Now, certainly current residential real estate prices, both single and multi-dwelling, remain high, predicated on continued strong immigration levels, traditional supply shortages in the eastern states, low unemployment and, of course, lower for longer interest rates. However, arguably a looming settlement bulge in Melbourne and closer to home in Brisbane is creating an identifiable stress point in the economy which needs to be closely monitored. But is there a housing bubble? Well, certainly there's not one in every market across the nation, given the varying supply-demand imbalances in each market. As a national bank operating across the country, we see firsthand many of these market conditions and therefore believe we're well positioned to opine. Indeed, pricing in some markets is still struggling to beat previous market highs, and prices in Perth are actually falling. So to unequivocally state that Australia is facing a housing bubble is clearly not accurate. Having said that, however, there are indeed areas and regions across the nation, and especially on the East Coast, where prices continue to set new highs on the back of supply constraints and low interest rates, and thus are arguably fully priced, with average prices across the combined capital cities up 7% in the 12 months to September 2016. Given these environmental conditions, we naturally remain cautious about the domestic housing market, but take comfort from several mitigating factors in managing our exposure, especially our strong risk culture and conservative risk settings. Finally, on to governance. Saying farewell and thank you to past directors is one of the sadder moments of any chairman's address. And on this note, I'd like to call out the significant contribution of long-standing Virgin-nominated director Neil Burkett, who resigned from BOQ's board during the year to pursue his diverse business interests in the UK, where he lives. Neil's been a significant contributor to the board over many years, and we salute his service and contribution and wish him well for the future. To offset Neil and other previous directors' departures, we welcome 3 new directors to our board this year who offer themselves for election today. I think Neil would be pleased that it takes 3 to replace him. The new additions continue the bank's evolution as a high-quality, high-performance board with complementary yet diverse skill sets that we believe are highly relevant to the bank's future strategy. A very special welcome, therefore, to Karen Penrose, who joins your board with significant experience in banking as well as a successful career as a non-executive director. John Lorimer also joins us this year and brings to the board not only wide-ranging banking skills in risk management and retail, but also considerable skills as a seasoned non-executive director with a global footprint. And finally, Warwick Negus, our latest addition, who replaces Neil as the Virgin-nominated director on our board. He comes to us after a distinguished career in financial services, especially in investment banking and funds management. And you'll hear more from all of these 3 directors, as they commented earlier, later in the meeting when they address you all as part of their election process. In the interim, I welcome them all to our board. In summary, 2016 has been a challenging year for all banks. However, we believe we can hold our heads high because despite the changing operating environment, we've increased profits for the 4th year running, made solid progress against our strategic objectives and strengthened our leadership team at board level. Against this background, the positive contribution from our specialist higher margin niche commercial businesses is pleasing, as is our focus on a disciplined approach to risk management and profitable growth. The outlook for revenue growth across the industry remains subdued, but we're well positioned to operate and adapt to this new environment and continue to be committed to our strategy, which provides significant opportunities for growth, which the bank has not had in the past. Finally, it behoves me to express my sincere thanks to all our wonderful staff for their hard work and to you, the shareholders, for your patience and support during the year. It's been appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. I will now hand over to the CEO, Mr. John Sutton, for his address.
Well, thank you, Roger, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about BOQ's performance over the past financial year and how we're continuing to adapt to the operating environment. Rapid technology advances and ongoing market volatility make for uncertain times globally as well as here in Australia. As the Chairman noted, 2016 has also seen a number of industry-wide headwinds emerge for banking. But rest assured, BOQ is well positioned to navigate these headwinds. The refreshed strategy I announced to the market just over a year ago focuses on niche segments which should deliver superior returns over time. Over the past few years, we've also developed a number of levers which enable us to be more nimble as we navigate the current landscape. I'll talk about these in more detail shortly. In 2016, BOQ delivered an increased profit for the fourth successive year. Cash earnings after tax increased to $360 million, up $3 million from the prior year. This is a good result in the current operating environment. We've responded appropriately, adapting to our surrounds by continuing to balance margin and growth, drive productivity and efficiency, and strengthen our asset quality. As some of the key levers behind our financial performance, I'd like to take a closer look at each of these. With interest rates at record lows, deposit holders are actively seeking the best return on their cash. This creates an interesting dynamic for banks looking to increase deposit balances and reduce dependency on wholesale funding. This, coupled with slowing system credit growth, which has increased price competition, has impacted our net interest margin, which reduced by 3 basis points over the year. This environment has made it even more important for BOQ to closely manage our margins. We have to balance the outcomes for shareholders and for customers on both the lending and deposit side. These decisions are not made lightly, and we continue to keep our pricing under review to ensure we remain both competitive and profitable. We've also had to continue being selective about where we and how we grow. For example, during the second half of FY16, we slowed asset growth and increased our focus on higher margin asset segments such as commercial lending. This is in line with our core strategic focus on specialist niche businesses, which continue to deliver strong returns. BOQ Specialists maintained its momentum with commercial loans growing 13% while maintaining good margins and low loss rates. BOQ Finance, our quiet achiever, has also delivered good returns with a 3% increase in asset growth in a flat market. Niche business banking segments grew above system, and we're seeing positive early results in retirement living, hospitality and agribusiness. Virgin Money launched its Reward Me home loan product, and at the time of our full year results, Virgin Money had received $100 million worth of home loan applications. I wanted to take a closer look at a few of these niche businesses. Virgin Money has been a great acquisition for us. It is a powerhouse brand that attracts a new and different customer than BOQ traditionally would. This is helping us to diversify our customer base and distribution channels. The Reward Me home loan is already in market, and since our full year results announcements, we've partnered with 2 additional major brokers, Aussie Home Loans and Connective. We have the brand rights for the next 37 years and see lots of opportunity as we continue to evolve the product offering underneath this brand, with the deposit product to follow shortly. Also, if I could call out BOQ Specialists, which continues to go from strength to strength, delivering substantial growth to the group. This business has a dominant market share with the medical professionals that specialises in servicing. Its high asset quality continues to contribute to the overall quality of the broader portfolio. We see ongoing growth opportunities in this business. For example, we've begun partnering with a number of universities to provide transaction and credit card accounts to medical and finance students. This is in line with the BOQ Specialist approach of being a finance partner through all stages of our clients' careers. Finally, in terms of balancing growth and margins, we've also increased our emphasis on deposit gathering and see further upside in this over time as our focus on deposits expands to all business groups within BOQ. Our OMB network has been particularly successful in this regard, demonstrating the continued importance of this unique service proposition. We've also maintained our strong focus on costs. In 2016, we kept underlying expense growth to 4%. This includes the investment in Virgin Money's mortgage product rollout and the $15 million efficiency investment we announced in February, which is on track to deliver above its payback target. We also introduced a number of additional efficiency initiatives which fit within our current expense profile and will deliver important ongoing expense savings into the future. Productivity and efficiency will remain priorities for the year ahead. We expect to keep underlying expense growth to 1% in 2017 while continuing to deliver our strategy. We're also continued strength in asset quality across all portfolios, a reflection of the disciplined approach we have taken to managing risk over the past 4 years. Loan impairment expense reduced 9% to $67 million, or 16 basis points of total loans, an extremely good result given the transition that is continuing to occur across the economy. Our sound risk management settings have significantly reduced our exposure to residential apartment development hotspots and mining-reliant regions. This is also an opportune time to look at what lies ahead for the Australian economy and the banking sector. The Australian economy is performing reasonably well. GDP growth is supported by low interest rates and relatively low unemployment. I am optimistic about the outlook for the Queensland economy, with some positive signs emerging. Tourism is an important contributor here in our home state. 3 out of 4 of the fastest growing airports in Australia are Queensland tourism areas: Gold Coast, Cairns and Sunshine Coast. Queensland has also experienced the highest net interstate migration since 2012. In terms of the banking sector, I've already indicated the outlook remains subdued. The headwinds the Chairman and I have discussed all impact the sector's ability to maintain revenue growth it has in the past. However, amongst the headwinds, opportunities exist. One in particular that I wanted to address is how advances in technology are driving changes in consumer preferences and the future of banking. Bank customers are increasingly adopting digital and mobile channels. This is changing the face of our service proposition and increased investment in digital channels. This is creating increased investment requirements and tighter turnaround time on what's now considered basic technology hygiene factors, such as improving our mobile apps for Virgin Money Australia and BOQ, upgrading our website platforms across the group, and upgrading to the latest smart ATMs with touch screens. The number of fintech startups are also growing by the day, as technology creates opportunities for disruption across different parts of the value chain. We see this as an opportunity to partner with fintechs and to accelerate our digital enablement. Looking ahead at our strategic priorities for 2017, we'll continue to mature our multiple distribution channels by further building out accredited brokers for Virgin Money, which when combined with BOQ's existing broker channels will give us access to 75% of the broker market. We'll continue to grow the right way by optimising our deposit growth with the help of data analytics. And of course, we'll continue our core strategy of focusing on niche target business segments and high margin business. Our strong focus on managing costs will be delivered through a number of initiatives which form part of our efficiency program. We will continue to invest in our leadership, diversity, ensuring all of our staff understand the importance of maintaining the highest ethical standards possible. I also want to reiterate the Chairman's comments on ethics and business conduct. This is top of mind at BOQ across all of our processes and stakeholders. We have a strong focus on how we service our customers, how we support our workforce and how we protect our shareholders' value. Every decision, every action is taken through this lens. All these priorities position us to deliver our goal of EPS outperformance over the long term. In summary, we are making good progress against our strategic objectives. Our increased profit for the 4th consecutive year has been a good result. The outlook for revenue growth across the industry remains subdued, but we are well positioned to operate and to adapt to this new environment. We will continue to focus on growing in higher margin segments while maintaining our risk discipline. Managing our costs remains key to our success. This will be supported by the rollout of further efficiency initiatives. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Board, my executive team, all the Group's employees whose collective efforts have made this result possible. I'd also like to thank all of our shareholders for your ongoing support. This has enabled us to build a strong and profitable business that is positioned well for the future, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We now turn to the formal matters of the meeting. The statements of financial position, financial performance and cash flows, together with the reports of the directors and auditors for the year ending the 31st of August 2016 have already been circulated to shareholders. The Corporations Act requires that the financial report, which includes the financial statement and directors' declaration, the directors' report and the auditors' report, to be laid before the annual general meeting. The statements of financial position, financial performance and cash flows, together with the reports of the directors and the auditors for the year ending 31st of August 2016, are now open for discussion. Are there any questions in relation to these reports or of the bank's auditor? There have been no questions. I will now move on to the next remaining piece of business of the meeting, being the various resolutions mentioned in the notice of meeting and the explanatory statement, the first of which is item 2, the election of directors. Before I move to the re-election and election of directors, I would like to inform shareholders that we have a program of board review and director renewal. The board review is undertaken annually with the assistance of external consultants, and this review assesses the maturity profile and the performance of the board as a whole, including that of the bank chairman and all committee chairs. Recommendations are made and the board develops a program to implement those recommendations. The Nomination and Governance Committee is responsible for overseeing a policy on director renewal. When a vacancy arises, the board assesses the competencies and diversity required to balance the skills around the board table and canvasses external candidates with those attributes with the assistance of an external search firm. In all cases, female candidates are considered. During the last 12 months, as I indicated earlier, there have been significant renewal of the board as previously observed. Mrs Carmel Gray and Mr Neil Burkett have both stepped down from BOQ since the last annual general meeting, whilst John Lorimer, Karen Penrose and Warwick Negus have joined as non-executive directors. Their election to the board will be considered later in the meeting, together with the re-election of Mr David Willis to the board. I will now deal with the resolutions. In accordance with the constitution of the company, Mr David Willis retires by rotation and, being eligible, offers himself for re-election. Mr Willis's background information is set out in the explanatory material that accompanied the notice of meeting and in the director's report on page 9 of the annual report, so I will not repeat those details. Since joining the board in 2010, Mr Willis has served your bank with distinction. His background in financial services over many years and through different market conditions has allowed him to make a significant contribution to the board's collective decision-making, and he is a highly valued part of your board. The board fully supports the re-election of Mr Willis, and before I put the motion forward, I would like to invite David to address you briefly on his background and areas of competency for the board. David.
Thank you, Roger. And good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to stand for the role of Director of BOQ, and if elected, this would be my third term since being first appointed in February of 2010. I am Chair of the Bank's Remuneration Committee, and I'm a member of the Risk Committee and the Nominations Committee, and I have signed the Banking and Finance Oath. The basis upon which I put forward my re-election to you as the owners of the business today is as follows. I'm not sure whether I'm setting a precedent by telling you what my age is, but I am 61. I am a qualified accountant. I've spent extended periods of time living and working in financial services in the UK, the USA and in Southeast Asia. I currently sit on 4 boards across diverse sectors in insurance, agriculture, manufacturing and, of course, banking. Additionally, I act as a mentor for several CEOs, and I chair a charity which I founded nearly 10 years ago to assist disadvantaged youth. 30 of my 36 years' professional experience has been in the financial services sector, including working for one of the big 4 banks, working for a regional bank and working for a foreign-owned bank. During this time, I've worked specifically in investment banking, in corporate banking, in retail banking, and been responsible for treasury operations. Ladies and gentlemen, if I might add a couple of comments to those of the Chair concerning remuneration, and in particular in my role as Chair of the Remuneration Committee, it's a very sensitive topic these days. We are, as a board, we are really conscious of that delicate balance between the absolute amounts that are being paid to financial service executives. It is a lot of money, but also the responsibility that we have to attract and to retain the very best people that we can. By attracting and retaining the very best people that we can, we believe that is a core component to the value that's created for you as shareholders, and that is a balance which we are aware of continuously when we're thinking about the remuneration policy and the practice. We're also conscious of the relationship between the amount of money that we're paying these executives and the value that's being created by you, being created for you. So every year we look at the amount of money we're paying and we look at the value that's created for you over the medium term. The board chair and I are meeting and listening to the views being expressed by you and your representatives. The redesign this year, in the current financial year, of our short-term incentive program is in part as a result of us talking to the shareholders and to your representatives and listening to what they had to say about the way in which they would like remuneration policy to work. Finally, I remain passionate about banks like BOQ. I just think that regional banks are so important to Australia in ensuring that we really provide a fair go for Australians and compete against the big banks who have such a significant market share. Thank you for the opportunity to stand again for this role, representing the interests of you as owners of Bank of Queensland.
Thank you, David. I move that Mr Willis be re-elected a director of the company. Before opening up the motion for discussion, as has been mentioned earlier, I will now report to you the results of the analysis of valid proxies received prior to the meeting with respect to this particular resolution, and they are on the screen in front of you. 160 million odd shares for, 3.5 million open, total open 164 million against 696,000. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr Chairman, we have a question from Sally Millick, our shareholder.
Good morning, Mr
Welcome,
Davis.
Sally.
Australian Shareholders Association likes directors to have a meaningful holding of shares in the company. And last year we asked the question, and I congratulate Richard Hare for amending his ways, and I congratulate Karen Penrose in taking an early step. But David, there seems to be a problem with your ability to buy shares. Is it something that the board can look at to facilitate for directors to get shares at appropriate timings?
Sally, thank you very much. And we, after our meeting beforehand, we were aware of this question. Board members are strongly encouraged, and in fact willingly participate in owning shares in the bank in which they're on the board of. This is part of our unwritten rules, and they're strongly encouraged, and as I say, do so willingly, and you've cited two excellent examples. It's never as easy as it should be. David, being a long-serving director, sits on a number of committees that gives him access at times to confidential information, and I'd hate to find that he is in a situation where he basically bridges the trust that you've provided in him and trades at an inappropriate time with information that's not generally available. That's not an excuse. David, in fact, has come up to me a couple of times in the last few weeks asking for permission to trade, but we have windows that prohibit him from trading before an AGM. He's quite free to buy and has told me he's going to be buying big. After the meeting. David also is a substantial holder of some of our hybrid notes, the preference shares that the company has indicated. So his investment in the bank is not just illustrated by the equity holdings he has. David, do you want to add anything else to that?
Thank you, Roger. That pretty much covers the explanation. I will be buying more shares.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. In accordance with the Constitution of... Are there any other questions? Sorry. On David's election. Okay, thank you very much. In accordance with the Constitution of the company, Ms Karen Penrose, who was appointed after the last annual general meeting of the bank, offers herself for election. Ms Penrose's background is set out in the explanatory material that accompanied the notice of meeting and in the director's report on page 9 of the annual report. Whilst Karen is a new member of the board, her experience as a seasoned non-executive director and her extensive business experience across the finance, property and resources industry all suggest she will be an invaluable member of your board. The board fully supports the election of Ms Penrose. Before I put the motion forward, I'd like to invite Karen to address you briefly on the background and areas of competency for the board.
Thank you, Roger. And good morning again to Bank of Queensland shareholders and everyone here who has made the time to participate in our annual general meeting. My name is Karen Penrose, and in the spirit of the president that David said before me, I'm 56 years old, and I have also taken the banking and finance oath. I stand before Bank of Queensland shareholders for you to consider my election to the board as an independent non-executive director. I am conscious that you have some details about me from the notice of meeting and our chairman's commentary, so I'll add to this background in this very short address. My interest in banking started a long time ago when I moved from my accounting and finance role with Exxon to join HSBC. I worked with HSBC for 10 years, initially in an accounting and finance role in the back office, and worked my way up from the back office to the front office, working with HSBC's investment bank. I then spent another 10 years with Commonwealth Bank, leading customer-facing businesses. When I left banking, I went back to my finance focus to work as a chief financial officer with 2 listed companies. I have had the pleasure or otherwise of working through a couple of economic cycles, all of which has and will continue to be valuable experience for me as a director on your bank board. I joined the BOQ board in November of 2015. In the past year, I have embraced the opportunity to contribute as a member of BOQ's Audit Committee and its Remuneration Committee, and to be part of and to promote a healthy and very ethical culture within BOQ for the benefit of our customers, our staff, our stakeholders, and importantly for our shareholders. More broadly than BOQ, I work as a full-time non-executive director. For me, this is an advantage as I get to see similar issues arising in different companies and can bring that knowledge and experience to my role and the very robust conversations that we have at the BOQ board. I serve on 3 other publicly listed companies, plus my pro bono board with a listed investment company that seeks to change the lives of young Australians affected by mental illness. I also sit on the advisory board of Chief Executive Women's Leaders Program that encourages the development and retention of talented women leaders. I'm also committed to investing in my own director skills, both technically and expanding my thinking in innovation and technology. And in calendar 2016, I spent time in both Israel and in Silicon Valley, broadening my horizons and my learning. I am very privileged to serve Bank of Queensland shareholders as a director, and if elected, will continue to provide that same dedication and focus as part of the BOQ board and in playing a role to create value for Bank of Queensland shareholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I move that Ms Penrose be elected as a director of the company. Before opening up the motion for discussion, as has been mentioned earlier, I will now report to you the results of the analysis of the valid proxies received prior to the meeting with respect to this particular resolution. And you can see them in front of you. Total for and against 162,890,000 and against 1.9 million. Now, is there any discussion on the election of Ms Karen Penrose to the board? There being no further question, I will now move on. A poll in relation to this resolution, of course, will be held at the end of the meeting. In accordance with the constitution of the company, Mr John Lorimer, who was appointed after last annual general meeting of the bank, offers himself for election. Mr Lorimer's background information is set out in the explanatory material that accompanied the notice of meeting and in the director's report on page 8 of the annual report. His experience as a seasoned executive both in Australia and overseas and his wealth of knowledge in the financial services industry all suggest he will be an invaluable member of your board, and we like what we see so far. The board fully supports the election of Mr Lorimer. Before I put the motion forward, I'd like to invite John to address you briefly on his background and areas of competency for the board.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And my name is John Lorimer. I'm 63 years of age, so you can work out the diversity of age profiles now across the board. I'm married and I reside in Sydney. I stand before you, the Bank of Queensland shareholders, to be considered for election to the BOQ board as an independent non-executive director. You'll have seen from my bio in the notice of the meeting that I have over 22 years of commercial banking experience with two international banks, Citibank and Standard Chartered. And this was across Australia, Asia for 9 years, and then in the UK for 11. I had country roles, regional roles and global roles in both business line management and functional responsibility in consumer and SME banking. For the last 8 years, since 2009, I have been a non-executive director in a large healthcare company called Bupa, which you're probably familiar with, a listed finance company and a listed asset manager, Aberdeen. I was also a trustee of the Charities Aid Foundation in the United Kingdom and chaired their subsidiary bank. In these governance roles, I have and do chair audit committees and risk committees. In Bank of Queensland, since joining in January of this year, I sit on the risk committee and the IT committee. So I bring to you, as shareholders, extensive financial services experience in both executive and governance capacities. But I think what's characterised my career is working in challenger organisations, i.e. one where the company has not had a dominant market share. And that requires the creation of a distinct point of difference in order to succeed. And that is one of the primary appeals of Bank of Queensland. So apart from performing to the best of my ability in the statutory and fiduciary responsibilities, I do believe that a good non-executive director has to be passionate about the business, the company, its customers and its shareholder interests. And that, I can assure you, I have, and if elected, it would be a privilege and a pleasure to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I move that Mr John Lorimer be elected a director of the company. Before opening up the motion for discussion, as has been mentioned earlier, I will now report to you the results of the analysis of valid proxies received prior to the meeting with respect to this particular resolution, and they're on the screen behind me. Total for and open 162.4 million shares, against 2.5 million. Before I open up the discussion, move to the next item. Is there any discussion on the motion? Anyone wish to make any comments? Thank you very much. As previously mentioned, a poll in relation to this resolution will be held at the end of the meeting. In accordance with the constitution of the company, Mr Warwick Negus, who was appointed after the last annual general meeting of the bank, offers himself for election. Mr Negus's background information is set out in the explanatory material that accompanied the notice of meeting. Warwick brings to the board his wealth of experience in the finance industry across Asia, Europe and Australia in both executive and directorship roles. The board believes Mr Negus will be an invaluable member of your board and fully supports his election. Before I put the motion forward, I would like to invite Warwick to address you briefly on his background and areas of competency for the board. Warwick.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, if you read in the annual report, you will see my age, and you will confirm that I bring considerable youth to this board. It will be a great privilege for me to continue in this capacity as a director should you vote in favour of my election today. I have worked in the finance industry for all of my working life for more than 30 years, through numerous deregulations, re-regulations, through the highs and the lows that the banking industry has experienced. My work experience is largely in funds management and investment banking in Australia and in various parts of the world. My last full-time executive position was as the Chief Executive of Colonial First State Global Asset Management, which is Australia's largest fund manager. I also stepped outside the career safety of large companies and started my own company in funds management. At its height, it had $9 billion of funds under management, and at the time, one of its investments was, in fact, the Bank of Queensland. I have also engaged proactively with industry regulators throughout my career, in Australia, in Singapore and in the UK in particular. And I think as regulations are tightened and as global standards are raised, a positive engagement with regulators is incredibly important for a bank such as the Bank of Queensland. For a number of years, I've also been a very happy customer of the Bank of Queensland. I decided to borrow from this bank, not because the pricing was in line with the market, but because the lending professional established a real relationship with me and a desire to do business with me, and it's a relationship that has endured. It was a pleasant experience and continues to be so. Increasingly, in the last 10 years, I've turned my mind to the world of governance and now have broad experience as a director of listed and unlisted companies. I'm currently also a director of ASX-listed Washington H. Soul Pattinson and Company. This is already a very strong board with genuine diversity of skills and experience. But I do believe that I have the ability to make a positive contribution. I'm really excited to be part of this board and the team under John Sutton, our Chief Executive, and hopefully I can influence this bank to make more good decisions about its business in the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Warwick. I move that Mr Negus be elected a director of the company. Before opening up the motion for discussion, as has been mentioned earlier, I will now report to you the results of the valid proxies received prior to the meeting with respect to this particular resolution, and they're on the screen behind me. Total for and open 164 million, against 826,000. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, well, as previously mentioned, a poll in relation to this particular resolution will be held at the end of the meeting. Now, I know some of you are wondering, there seems to be an awfully large number of directors up for election and re-election. The average tenure on this board of your directors is just under 3 years, so please don't draw conclusions that because we had 3 new directors elected today, or hopefully elected today, that there is an imbalance in youth and experience. In fact, quite the contrary. We have a diversity of age, as you have heard from our last speaker. We certainly have a diversity in experience, and we have a significant diversity in skills. Banking underpins almost all those that have been nominated for election, but we have strong health representation with Ramsay on one side and Bupa on the left, and given our BOQ specialist ambitions, which focuses on the healthcare business, that's a very interesting connection. We have technology, and that obviously plays to our efforts and initiatives in digitalising the bank, and we certainly have risk and credit and a lot of wisdom here. So you should be very proud of your board, and I do hope that you support the election of those that have stood before you today. The third resolution we have to deal with today is the approval of performance award rights under the Managing Director's long-term incentive package. This is Resolution 3 in the notice of meeting. The background and reasoning for the resolution are set out in the explanatory statement accompanying the notice of meeting, but I'd like to make some points before moving this motion. ASX Listing Rule 10.14 requires the approval of shareholders where the bank intends to issue securities under an employee incentive scheme to a related party. Mr Sutton is a related party of BOQ under the listing rules. As a result of shareholder feedback, the board adopted a dual framework that would offer greater flexibility for setting appropriate performance conditions for performance award rights, as Mr Willis pointed out during his address. Under this approach, 2 vesting frameworks have been selected by the board. Each vesting framework selected will apply to a proportion of the performance award rights issued to an employee. Up to 80% of the performance award rights may vest based on the first measure, which is the total shareholder return performance measure set out in section 3.4. And up to 20% of the performance award rights, or the remaining balance, may vest on successfully meeting the second vesting measure, which is an assessment of BOQ's relative non-diluted cash earnings per share against a predetermined peer group of financial services. The earnings per share performance measure is further explained below. Total shareholder return is a measure of the entire return a shareholder would obtain from holding an entity's securities over a given period, taking into account factors such as changes in the market value of those securities and the dividends paid over the period. A 3-year performance period for the top-up performance award rights under Resolution 3 is for the period 2016 to 2019. For the total shareholder return portion of his performance award rights, half of Mr Sutton's award rights, i.e. 40% of the total award grant, will vest if BOQ's TSR performance over a 4-year period is in the top 50% of the peer group. Delisted companies will be excluded from the peer group at the time of vesting. 100% or all of the performance award rights will vest if BOQ's total shareholder return performance is in the top 25%. For total shareholder return performance between those targets, a relative proportion of the performance award rights between 1/2 and 100% would vest. None of the performance award rights vest if BOQ's total shareholder return performance is in the bottom 50%. Now, initially, the peer group will consist of the S&P ASX 200 from time to time, excluding selected entities in resources, real estate investment trusts, telecommunications, energy and utilities, and other such inclusions and exclusions as a qualified advisor to the board considers appropriate. For the earnings per share measured portion of his performance award rights, half of Mr Sutton's award rights, that's 10% of the total award right, will vest if BOQ's relative cash earnings per share performance over the 3-year period is ranked in the top 40% of the financial services peer group, which is the 4 major banks and Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. All of the performance award rights, representing a portion of 20% of the total award grant, will vest if BOQ's relative cash earnings per share performance is in the total top 10% of the comparator group's returns. For earnings per share performance between those targets, a relative proportion of the performance award rights between 50% and 100% would vest. None of the performance rights vest if BOQ's relative cash earnings per share performance is in the bottom 60%. And while the board believes the earnings per share targets and vesting schedule strike an appropriate balance between being achievable yet sufficiently challenging, the board retains a discretion to adjust the earnings per share performance hurdle as required to ensure that Mr Sutton is neither advantaged nor disadvantaged by matters outside his control that may materially affect earnings per share, for example, by excluding one-off non-recurrent items or the impact of significant acquisitions or disposals. Before I put the motion forward, I'd like to add that the three main proxy advisor firms that advise institutional investors have studied this resolution and have given their support to it, advising their clients to vote in favour of the resolution. These proxy votes are now displayed on the screen behind me. Open proxies in favour of the chairman of the meeting and which authorise me to vote will be voted in favour of the resolution. You can see them here in front of you. Total for and against 158.9 million and against 5.6 million. As Mr Sutton has an interest, he will not make a recommendation and will not vote on this resolution unless he has been provided with a directed proxy by a shareholder entitled to vote on this matter. Any votes cast on this resolution as proxy by other key management personnel of the BOQ Group or their closely related parties will be disregarded unless they are cast in accordance with a directed proxy given by a shareholder entitled to vote on the resolution. You see the shareholders. I will now move the motion that for the purposes of ASX Listing Rule 10.14, approval be given for the grant to or for the benefit of Mr John Sutton, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of BOQ, of 117,865 performance award rights under the BOQ Award Rights Plan in accordance with the terms described in item 3 in the explanatory statement. Now, that's a complicated resolution. 80% TSR, 20% EPS, various vesting conditions apply. Is there any discussion on the motion that people wish to raise? Okay, well, thank you very much. A poll on this resolution will be held at the end of the meeting. I now turn to Resolution 4 in the notice of meeting concerning non-executive directors' remuneration. BOQ's non-executive director remuneration strategy is based on the need to attract and retain individuals of appropriate calibre, and I hope you've seen the results of those endeavours today. The time, imposts and responsibilities of directors of an APRA-supervised financial institution are significant, and as the bank grows, the pressure and demands increase. The $200,000 increase in the aggregate director fee pool that is being sought will allow the board flexibility to deal with future changes in membership and composition of the board to ensure that an appropriate mix of skills and experience can be maintained or added to the board. In this regard, BOQ has appointed 3 non-executive directors since the last annual general meeting, and 2 non-executive directors have stepped down from the board since that time, as we've already discussed. BOQ expects to continue to refresh the board in the future. These new appointments, however, are not expected to fully utilise the aggregate fee pool for 2017 that is being sought, but will provide your board with flexibility for future year appointments as is deemed necessary. We trust you will support this resolution and the reasoning behind it. It's not an immediate pay increase for anyone. It's purely some insurance that we have to enable us to continue to ensure we have a high-performing board. The proxy votes are now displayed on the screen behind me. You can see there for and open 158.9 million and against 5.2 million. I will now move the motion that an increase in the aggregate maximum amount of non-executive director fees from 2.6 million per annum, inclusive of superannuation guarantee charge contributions, to 2.8 million per annum, inclusive of SGC contributions, to be allocated among the non-executive directors as they agree, be approved for all purposes, including ASX Listing Rule 10.17. Is there any discussion on the motion? Thank you very much. Again, a poll in relation to this resolution will be held at the end of the meeting. Resolution 5, the remuneration report. Listed companies are required to put to their shareholders a resolution to adopt the remuneration report contained in the annual report. The resolution is advisory only and does not bind directors. However, as many shareholders will now be aware, if 25% or more of shareholders vote against a company's remuneration report 2 years in a row, shareholders may then resolve that a further general meeting be called, at which all of the board, other than the managing director, must step down and submit themselves for re-election if they wish to continue on the board. The remuneration report sets out the board's policies for director and senior management remuneration, including a discussion of the relationship of remuneration to the bank's performance and other information required by the Corporations Act about director and senior management compensation. Before I put this motion to the meeting, I'd like, however, to make a couple of observations. Your board has worked extremely hard this year to clearly articulate its strategy concerning executive pay, including setting out a summary narrative of our remuneration policy and continuing the practice adopted in past years of providing a table of take-home pay for 2016. The report has also been refined again this year to incorporate suggestions made by shareholders. Whilst we're required to include in the remuneration report a valuation of the shares and the award rights granted to executives in the financial year, this is not necessarily reflective of the value of those grants to executives when and if they vest in the future. And we hope that the inclusion, therefore, of the take-home pay figures presents a clearer picture for shareholders. This is on page 57 of the annual report, if you wish to look it up. The Board's Human Resources and Remuneration Committee, with the assistance of outside independent consultants, reviews and benchmarks the remuneration levels of senior executives annually. We're an industry sector where we compete for talent and where remuneration has always been higher than most, a point that my colleague Mr Willis made during his speech on re-election. We need to retain our people, and in a market that is competitive, we need to reward our employees fairly. During the year, the Board sought to further align shareholder value and executive remuneration. Clawback provisions now apply to executive bonuses through a policy of deferral of 50% of bonuses, and there are clear performance indicators for all executives. We believe, however, that directors and executives should be rewarded in keeping with BOQ's returns to shareholders, so that there is alignment and there is congruence. The Board believes also in paying its leadership team fairly for performance and competitively. We believe in alignment in terms of the reward between the returns to shareholders and the returns to management. We believe in paying for performance and alignment of shareholders' interests and those of management through the cycle. And finally, your Board believes that most compensation should be at risk and not just an entitlement, and that it should have a large deferral element and that it should be regularly benchmarked by independent consultants. We, the Board, take pride in paying management for that performance and trust that you support our view in this regard. Now, the proxy votes on this proposal are now displayed on the screen behind me. Open proxies given in favour of the chairman of the meeting, which authorise me to vote, will be voted in favour of the resolution. Total for and open 158.7 million, against 4.9 million. Now, I'd remind the other directors, key management personnel and their associates that they must not vote on this resolution unless they have been provided with a directed proxy by a shareholder entitled to vote on this matter. I will now move the motion that the remuneration report contained in BOQ's 2016 annual report be adopted. Is there any discussion on the motion? Thank you very much. Again, a poll in relation to this resolution will be held at the end of the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to open the meeting to any general questions, having finished the formalities. Would anyone like to ask a question of the Board or senior management? Sally.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Here's the bill.
We're constantly being warned about disruptive technology, and everybody's being told that everything's going to be Uberised in the very near future. What is Bank of Queensland doing to protect itself from such threats of disruptive technology?
Well, you must have been at one of our meetings yesterday, Sally. We spent hours going through cyber and cyber protection policies firewalls, malware, ransomware, all the evil that has been propagated as banks try to protect themselves from improper, illegal and inappropriate access to our data and our records, largely for personal gain. This is an evolving area of expertise, something that every listed company, every company indeed, in fact every individual is now increasingly aware of, and we are spending a large amount of money and a large amount of time trying to make sure that we are protected and that your interests as shareholders are protected. Perhaps I might just ask Michelle if you would like to say something. Michelle chairs our IT committee and therefore is at the cutting edge of this, so to speak.
Thanks, Roger, and thanks for the question, Sally. So as the chairman has just referred to, I think there are two sort of areas that we in particular look to. One is what Roger's just talked about, which is protecting the assets of the bank and in particular information and customer data. But the second thing that we've been working on, and we had a trip to Silicon Valley this year to actually immerse ourselves in the digital experience overseas, is just trying to understand where the trends in digital technology are going and what we need to do to stay ahead of the curve. And as Roger mentioned yesterday, we actually had a couple of hours, we have an IT committee that I chair, and we had a couple of hours talking about our digital strategy and making sure that we're prepared and the velocity of what we do is actually ahead of the curve. Thanks, Roger.
Sally, okay. Any more questions? Yes.
Lindsay Horn has a question. Lindsay is a shareholder.
Thank you. I don't have to go very far. Mr. Chairman, you said we're allowed one question each. I've got a question and a couple of comments. What would you like first?
Lindsay, go ahead. Must disclose your age first. Sorry.
Senior citizen. Very senior. The question, very simple one for an old worn-out peon like me. In the shareholder review you talk about, and the managing director mentioned also, is commercial data analytics. What's commercial data analytics for a peasant like me?
It's a very good question, Lindsay, but what we are doing is using computer technology to look at the different aspects of our customer base to interpret customer behaviour. So a prime example would be understanding the elasticity of deposit pricing for term deposits, and there's quite a lot of work that we do around that. In fact, I was in India last week visiting one of our key vendors who's actually supplied a significant amount of software for us to digitise our lending program. But we also had the chance to visit IBM, and to give you an example of the power of computing and where it's heading to, IBM Watson, which is a computer, can translate Wikipedia into 15 languages now into 1.5 seconds. So at BOQ we're spending a lot of time to use customer data analytics to understand customer behaviour to actually improve our service and our offering to our customers.
Thanks. And a couple of comments?
Yeah, sure, Lindsay, please.
First of all, with your address, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you voted or if you had some help, but I thought it was a very good address.
Thank you.
I thought you covered it very well and presented.
You can ask 3 questions now.
And get a cup of tea after it, yeah. The other thing is, you said the Bank of Queensland, this is the 147th AGM.
Yep.
Is it really the 147th AGM of the Bank of Queensland, or do they mean the Bank of Queensland and
predecessor companies?
Predecessors.
Yeah. I missed a few of those meetings, but no, it's the predecessor companies is our name, and corporate structure has changed. But
yeah. So it's a bit
we claim ownership for 147 years, so we can.
It's a bit misleading when people say 147 years, but you should actually say and the predecessors. It's a bit pedantic, I know. But
No. It's a good question.
I'm a pedantic person. The third. Would you like to comment on the share price? I just look at ASX printout. I see the share price in 2007, 2008 was up at $18. We're now down around $11. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, look, I think as both the Chief Executive and I observed, I mean, performance of our stock obviously reflects the market conditions in which we operated. Certainly, you picked a period just before the GFC when everything was golden and we were doing remarkably well, as the previous chairman here can enunciate and detail more thoroughly. Since that time, obviously, with the deleveraging that's occurred in the global economy and changing economic environments, changing interest rates, for all banks, they are no longer performing at their record highs that prevailed before the GFC, and we're at the bottom end of that train. So it's hard for us to do better than the majors, notwithstanding our position. And tough economic environments have hurt us substantially over the last 12 months. Our 3- and 4-year performance, 5-year performance records, however, have us as the best performing Australian bank stock from a TSR perspective in the country, and that's something we take pride on. So it's not a perfect score. We can always find the periods to measure performance by. You can go back to another period there where we were a lot less than $18, and that may in fact provide a better benchmark. But certainly the recent history suggests that your bank is performing better than any of the majors and any of their other competitors, and the last 12 months being a predetermined period, 12 months, not 12 months 1 day or 11 months 4 days, has not been so good for the industry reasons that I've already given.
Thanks. Yeah, well, actually the share price has been down to just over $6, so it has been a lot worse. So look on the bright side of life, eh? And
we like $18. That would be good.
Oh yeah, well, as everyone in this room would, we'd all like $18. But if it's reassuring, I also have shares in all the other 4 major banks, and they're all in the same boat. So.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, Vicky Sweetster has a question. Vicky is a shareholder.
Morning, Vicky.
Good morning, Chairman and the board. Given that there's been some emphasis during the meeting that profits have continuously risen, could you please explain that all of us and others as owners of the company have to accept the fact that dividends have gone down?
Dividends haven't gone down. Dividends, in fact, have continued to rise, and in 2013 they were 58 cents a share. They were 66 cents a share in 2014, 74 cents a share in 2015, and in 2016, the year just passed, they are 76 cents, which is up 2 cents on the year before. So dividends are increasing. The payout ratio has changed, but the dividends in cents per share for you as shareholder continue to grow. Well, have continued growing. I don't want to make any forecasts for the future. Okay.
We have a question from Rodney Kendall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was pleased with the comments about the bank keeping ahead of digital trends or trying to stay in touch with them. And I was just wondering if there's a possibility that those same digital trends might be applied to this meeting. At some of the other AGMs I go to, the shareholders, when they walk in, are handed a electronic device which, after the, say, presentation of one of the directors is given as to their re-election or the other reports, the shareholders can then vote immediately with that electronic device, and the vote is recorded and goes straight to the screen. The other great advantage of that is that their vote is blended with that from the proxy votes beforehand, instead of the situation we get here now, where we get presented with the proxy votes before the people in this room have had a chance to vote. At some other meetings, though, that I attend, it is the case where people actually do vote before the proxies are displayed, even though they don't have that handheld device. I think of the Australian Agricultural Company as a company that does that after prompting for a couple of years to do that. And I know that Tattersalls is a company that uses the computer, the handheld device. And I just will draw a comparison, for instance, when our fellow shareholders in this room go to vote at a local, state or federal election on a Saturday morning, that when they walk into the polling booth, they do not see displayed on the wall the pre-polling results and the postal votes beforehand. They occur after they voted on their Saturday. I'm just wondering, there may be an expense involved. I understand that, of these devices. And I'm not sure. I think the ones that I've encountered are done by computer share, whereas I noticed that the Bank of Queensland's with Link Market Services. So, thank you.
Very, very good observation. Thank you very much for that. We did have a brief discussion about handhelds early on in the year, and that's something that the Company Secretary and our proxy service Link, that we'll have a conversation with them to see if we can try to end up with a more efficient way of making sure all interests of shareholders, both those that aren't here and those that are here, are reflected in a democratic and efficient way. So thank you very much for that, and we'll pursue that. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any more questions or issues that people wish to raise? Thank you very much. That concludes the consideration of the resolutions. We will now conduct the polls on resolutions 2, 3, 4 and 5. Shareholders and proxy holders would have received on registration a blue voting paper that provides for the holding of a poll on the resolutions put to shareholders. Ms Katie Guilfoyle of the bank's share registry Link Market Services will act as returning officer for the poll. I will firstly provide information for shareholders and then for proxy holders. First of all, if you are a shareholder, so you're not acting as a proxy for someone else, if you wish to vote for the resolutions numbered 2, 3, 4 and 5, please mark the for box. If you wish to vote against any of the resolutions, mark the against box, and if you wish to abstain, please mark the abstain box. If you are a proxy holder, on the other hand, you must comply with the direction of the shareholder, the owning shareholder, if you wish to lodge a valid vote. The for and against votes provided to you will be counted automatically by Link Market Services. If the shareholder is not directed how you must vote and has given you the discretion to decide how to vote, you should mark the for or against or abstain box for each resolution in the manner that you think is appropriate. And of course, if you have any questions, please ask any one of the Link Market Services share registry officers before lodging your poll paper in the poll boxes located at the exits to this room. As I indicated earlier, after the votes have been counted, the results of the poll will be released to the ASX and will be displayed on the bank's website. So it's very important you understand those instructions. We want your vote to count. I think the point that the previous speaker made, this is your right as shareholders, so please fill the forms in correctly. If you're not clear, ask. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank you all for coming and supporting the bank. It's very, very important to us. It's the only chance we really have to see the shareholders, and it's your right to basically exercise that option, which we acknowledge. Please have a most enjoyable festive season, and to show our appreciation, a light lunch is now available in the foyer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.